The throne room of Frostfang Keep smelled of cold iron and dying embers, a scent that spoke of power kept on a tight leash. Ice had claimed the northern windows overnight, transforming them into fractured mirrors that scattered torchlight across stone walls thick enough to withstand siege. I wrapped my thin shawl closer to my body, the fabric doing little against the chill that seeped from the floor and into my bones. Being a poor Omega in the Alpha King's fortress meant learning to navigate spaces not designed for you, learning to breathe quietly, learning to make your heartbeat forgettable. My auburn hair, the one feature that drew unwanted attention, was braided and pinned tight beneath a servant's scarf, a remnant from my guardian's younger days. She had pressed it into my hands this morning with trembling fingers, whispering, "Come back to me, Nerissa. Whatever happens in that place, you come back." Her words circled in my mind now as I stood among the handful of Omegas summoned to the king's presence, my pulse a frantic drumbeat against my throat. The decree had arrived at dawn, carried by a beta with eyes like winter storms and a mouth that never curved toward kindness. Now we waited, a small cluster of expendable women, while courtiers and warriors filled the great hall with their confident postures and careless laughter. I kept my eyes lowered, counting the cracks in the stone beneath my worn boots, trying to become invisible. The command sliced through conversation like a blade through silk. The crowd didn't just part. It recoiled, bodies pressing against pillars and walls as if proximity to the king might burn. I flattened myself against the cold stone, head bowed, as Alpha King Maddox entered. He moved like a winter storm given form. Silver hair fell past broad shoulders encased in black leather and dark armor, each piece etched with a howling wolf sigil of Frostfang. His presence was absolute, the kind of authority that didn't need to be announced because it consumed all the air in the room. Even from my position at the periphery, I could feel the weight of his dominance pressing down like atmospheric pressure before lightning strikes. His face was all sharp angles and brutal symmetry, handsome in the way that dangerous things often are, beautiful and utterly unforgiving. At his side walked Beta Lazarus, a wolf of high rank with calculating eyes and a smile that never reached them. And trailing behind, dragged forward by a stern nursemaid who looked ready to resign, was a boy of perhaps 7 years. Prince Jackson, the Alpha King's son, the cursed pup. Even across the crowded hall, I could see the fury radiating from the child's small frame. His white blonde hair was disheveled, his fine clothes rumpled as though he'd fought against wearing them. But it was his eyes, pale and wild, that held me frozen. They swept across the assembled Omegas with such concentrated hatred that I felt it like a physical blow. This was the boy who had sent 12 caregivers fleeing in as many months. The boy whose tantrums had left grown women with scratches, bruises, and shattered nerves. The boy whose mother, Queen Helen, had died 3 years ago, leaving behind a child who blamed every woman alive for not being her. "You have all been briefed on the position," the beta announced, his voice carrying the bored authority of someone who had delivered this speech too many times. "Prince Jackson requires a new attendant. The pay is generous. The work is difficult." A masterful understatement. The work was surviving a traumatized child's rage long enough to earn coin I desperately needed. My guardian's fever had worsened, and the healer's price had tripled. I had no choice but to stand here, offering myself up for this impossible task. King Maddox's gaze swept over us, assessing each Omega with the cold precision of a predator evaluating prey. When those mercury eyes landed on me, I felt the world narrow to a single point of terrible clarity. He studied me like I was an equation that needed solving, a problem to be calculated and dismissed. "You!" His voice was granite and winter wind. "The one attempting to disappear into the wall. Step forward." My legs moved before my mind could catch up, carrying me into the center of the hall where every eye could mark my inadequacy. Up close, the Alpha King was even more imposing, easily a foot taller, radiating a power that made my Omega instincts scream to submit, to flee, to do anything but meet his gaze. I didn't meet it. I kept my eyes on the sigil at his chest, on the snarling wolf that seemed more alive than embroidery had any right to be. "Name," he commanded. "Nerissa, your majesty." My voice was steadier than I felt. You understand the terms. The danger. I thought of my guardian's labored breathing, of the healer's ultimatum, of the empty coin purse hidden beneath my mattress. Yes, Your Majesty. Something flickered across his face. Not quite surprise, not quite respect. Most run when they see him. Why are you still standing here? Because I have nowhere else to go, I thought. Because desperation makes cowards brave and the poor foolish. Because I'm already invisible. So maybe a child's hatred won't see me clearly enough to break me. Because I need the work, I said instead, offering him the only truth that mattered. King Maddox studied me for a long moment, then turned to his son. The boy had been watching our exchange with those unsettling pale eyes. His small hands clenched into fists at his sides. Jackson, the king said, his voice softening by a fraction, the only tenderness I would witness. This is Nerissa. She will be your new attendant. The boy's response was immediate and visceral. He bared his teeth, a gesture more wolf than child, and lunged forward. The nursemaid caught him by the collar, barely restraining him as he snarled. I don't want her. I don't want any of them. Send her away. The king's expression never changed. He simply watched his son's fury with the resigned patience of a man who had witnessed this scene too many times to count. When the boy finally exhausted himself, trembling with rage and something that looked heartbreakingly like grief, Maddox turned back to me. The position begins immediately. Your payment will be generous. Double if he draws blood, triple if you last a full week. He paused, his mercury eyes boring into mine. Most don't survive 3 days. Do you still accept? I thought of the healer's hands on my guardian's fevered brow. I thought of the empty pantry and the landlord's threats. I thought of how small and powerless I had felt every day of my life, and how this was simply one more impossible thing to survive. Yes, Your Majesty. I accept. For the first time, something that might have been approval crossed the Alpha King's face. Or perhaps it was simply recognition, one desperate creature acknowledging another. Then welcome to Frostfang Keep, Omega Nerissa. He gestured toward his son, who watched me with eyes full of promised violence. Try not to bleed too quickly. The stone is difficult to clean. As the king swept from the hall with his entourage, leaving me alone with a boy who hated me and the future I couldn't afford to escape, I felt the weight of my decision settle over my shoulders like chains. I had 3 days to survive. 3 days to earn enough coin to save the only person who had ever loved me. 3 days before the Alpha King's cursed pup destroyed me completely. I pulled my grandmother's scarf a little tighter and prayed to gods I wasn't sure were listening. The boy smiled at me then. It was not a kind smile. And somewhere in the cold halls of Frostfang Keep, I heard the first whisper of my fate beginning to unfold. The nursemaid who escorted me through the eastern wing walked with the brisk efficiency of someone who had performed this duty too many times. Her name was Clara, and she spoke without looking at me, her words clipped and rehearsed. The prince's chambers are on the 3rd floor. Meals are delivered at dawn, midday, and dusk. He rarely eats. Don't take it personally. She paused at a heavy oak door, her hand resting on the iron handle. Before we go up, there's something you should see. She led me down a side corridor I hadn't noticed, one that seemed to narrow as we walked, the torches growing sparse and the air growing colder. We stopped before a door marked only with a simple placard. Storage. Clara pushed it open. The room beyond was larger than I expected, lined with shelves that stretched from floor to ceiling. But instead of linens or supplies, the shelves held toys. Hundreds of them. Wooden horses with broken legs, cloth dolls with torn faces, painted soldiers missing limbs, storybooks with pages ripped out and scattered across the floor like fallen leaves. The Hall of Broken Toys, Clara said quietly, her voice losing some of its professional edge. Every woman who came before you tried to reach him through gifts, through kindness, through bribery. The prince destroyed every single offering. She picked up a porcelain music box, its lid hanging by a single hinge. Lady Margaret brought this from the southern provinces. It played a lullaby his mother used to sing. He threw it against the wall within an hour. I walked deeper into the room, my footsteps echoing against stone. Each broken object was a testament to failure, a monument to the 12 women who had tried and fled. Some toys looked expensive: ivory chess sets, silk puppets, golden rattles that must have cost more than my guardian's cottage. Others were humble: carved wooden animals, knitted bears, simple spinning tops. All destroyed with equal fury. "Why are you showing me this?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Because you should understand what you're walking into." Clara set the music box down with a gentleness it no longer deserved. "That boy doesn't just hate women, Omega Nerissa. He wants to erase every trace of us. And he's very, very good at it." She turned toward the door, then paused. "The smart ones quit before he draws blood. The desperate ones last until he does. Which are you?" I thought of my guardian's fever, of the healer's cold eyes as she'd named her price. "The desperate kind." Clara's expression softened, just slightly. "Then may the old gods grant you mercy. You'll find none up there." The prince's chambers occupied the entire 3rd floor of the northern tower, a space far too large for a 7-year-old child. The main room was pristine, almost aggressively so, with furniture pushed against walls, surfaces bare of decoration, and curtains drawn tight against the afternoon light. It looked less like a child's sanctuary and more like a cell someone had tried to make comfortable and failed. Jackson stood in the center of the room, his small frame rigid with tension. He had changed from his formal clothes into something simpler, a dark tunic and trousers that made him look even smaller, even more fragile. But there was nothing fragile about the way he watched me enter, his pale eyes tracking my every movement like a predator measuring distance. Clara cleared her throat. "Prince Jackson, this is. I know who she is." His voice was surprisingly clear for a child, sharp and cold. "Another Omega who thinks she can fix me. Another woman who thinks she's better than the others." "I don't think I'm better than anyone, Your Highness," I said carefully, keeping my voice level. "I'm just here to help." His laugh was bitter, too old for his young face. "Help. They all say that. Help with meals. Help with lessons. Help with the nightmares." He took a step toward me, his small hands clenching and unclenching. "I don't need help. I need everyone to leave me alone." Clara backed toward the door. "I'll return before supper. If you need assistance." "She won't," Jackson interrupted, still staring at me. "She'll be gone before then. They always are." The door closed with a soft click, and suddenly we were alone. The silence stretched between us, heavy and expectant. I could hear my own heartbeat, feel the weight of his hatred pressing against my skin like a physical force. "Your Highness," I began. "Perhaps we could." He moved faster than I anticipated. One moment he was standing in the center of the room, the next he was directly in front of me, his small hand raised. I saw the flash of something metallic. A pin, I realized, one of the decorative clasps from his formal attire, its point sharp and deliberately positioned. The scratch came swift and precise, dragging across my forearm with enough force to part fabric and skin. Pain bloomed hot and immediate, blood welling up in a thin crimson line. I didn't cry out. I didn't step back. I simply looked down at the wound, then up at the boy who had inflicted it. His face was triumphant, waiting for me to scream, to curse him, to run. When I did none of these things, confusion flickered across his features. "You're supposed to leave now," he said, but his voice had lost some of its certainty. "You're supposed to cry and tell my father I'm a monster." I pulled a handkerchief from my pocket, one of the few possessions I owned that wasn't threadbare, and pressed it against the wound. The white fabric bloomed red. "Is that what you want? For me to call you a monster?" He blinked, thrown by the question. "I don't care what you call me. I think you do." I kept my voice gentle, the way my guardian spoke to frightened animals. "I think you care very much. That's why you do this." His expression shuttered closed, walls slamming back into place. You don't know anything about me. You're right. I don't. I moved slowly toward one of the chairs pushed against the wall, never turning my back on him, and sat down carefully. But I'd like to. If you'll allow it. I won't. He retreated to the window, putting distance between us. And you'll leave. They all leave. I pressed harder against my wound, feeling the warm wetness seep through the fabric. The pain was sharp but bearable, nothing compared to the hunger pangs I'd endured, the cold nights without fuel for the fire, the fear of watching my guardian waste away. I'm not leaving, Your Highness. He turned to face me, and for just a moment, I saw past the anger to the grief beneath. To the small boy who had lost his mother and didn't know how to exist in a world where she no longer drew breath. Then the moment passed, and the walls came back up. You will, he promised, his voice carrying the certainty of someone who had been proven right too many times. They all do. The summons came 2 hours later, delivered by a servant who looked at my blood-stained sleeve with unsurprised eyes. The Alpha King required my presence in his private study. Immediately, I followed the servant through corridors that grew progressively more opulent, the rough stone giving way to polished marble, the simple torches replaced by elaborate candelabras. We stopped before a door of dark wood carved with intricate wolf motifs, their eyes inlaid with chips of amber that seemed to glow in the flickering light. The servant knocked once, then pushed the door open. The study was smaller than I expected, more intimate. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lined 3 walls, packed with volumes that looked ancient and well-used. A massive desk dominated the center of the room, its surface covered in maps, correspondence, and official documents bearing royal seals. Behind the desk sat Alpha King Maddox, his silver hair catching the light from the fireplace that crackled against the 4th wall. He wasn't alone. Beta Lazarus stood beside the desk, his posture casual but his eyes sharp as they swept over me. He was handsome in a calculated way. Dark hair perfectly groomed, expensive clothing that highlighted his rank, a smile that suggested he knew secrets you didn't. Everything about him was designed to intimidate, to remind lesser wolves of their place in the hierarchy. The Omega, he said, his voice smooth as silk and twice as dangerous. Still alive, I see. That's unexpected. King Maddox gestured to my arm, where blood had soaked through the handkerchief and was beginning to drip onto the floor. You're injured. It wasn't a question, but I answered anyway. Yes, Your Majesty. My son did that. Yes, Your Majesty. Lazarus circled around me, close enough that I could smell his cologne, something expensive and cloying. Most Omegas would be crying by now, running to authority, demanding justice, playing the victim. He stopped in front of me, forcing me to look up to meet his gaze. Why aren't you? Because His Highness is a child in pain, not a criminal, I said carefully. And because I knew the terms when I accepted this position. Something flickered in Lazarus's eyes. Surprise, perhaps, or calculation. How noble. How selfless. He turned to the king. Your Majesty, surely you see the problem here. This Omega is either remarkably stupid or dangerously manipulative. Either way, she's unsuitable for. That's not your decision to make, Lazarus. Maddox's voice was cold, cutting through the beta's objection like a blade. He stood, moving around the desk with that predatory grace, and approached me. Show me the wound. I hesitated, then unwrapped the blood-soaked handkerchief. The scratch was ugly, deeper than I'd initially thought, the edges already beginning to swell. The king studied it with clinical detachment, then raised his eyes to mine. This will scar. Most wounds do, Your Majesty. And yet you returned to his chambers after Clara escorted you out. You stayed the full 2 hours despite the injury. He reached for a small box on his desk, withdrew a leather pouch that clinked with the sound of coins. Double payment as promised. He held it out but didn't release it when I reached for it. Our fingers brushed, and I felt the overwhelming power of his dominance, the alpha authority that could crush an Omega's will without effort. This is a test, Omega Nerissa, he said quietly. His voice pitched for my ears alone. Every day you remain is a test. Every wound my son inflicts, every cruel word, every moment of hatred, it's all a test. A test of what, Your Majesty? His mercury eyes bored into mine. Whether you're strong enough to survive what this family has become. Whether you're foolish enough to stay when any reasonable person would flee. Whether you're the solution. He paused, something complicated crossing his face. Or simply the next failure in a long line of failures. Lazarus made a disgusted sound. Your Majesty, this is absurd. The Omega is nothing special. She's poor, poorly educated, poorly bred. There are dozens of qualified caregivers from noble families who would last even less time than the others, Maddox interrupted, still holding my gaze. Noble Omegas come with expectations. They come with pride. They come with families who will demand retribution when my son harms them. He finally released the coin pouch into my hand. This one comes with nothing but desperation. That makes her either the worst candidate possible or the only one who might actually succeed. The words should have stung, being called desperate, being reduced to nothing, but they were simply truth. I was desperate, had nothing, and that made me exactly what this impossible situation required. If you quit now, the king continued, you may keep the coins and leave without consequence. No one will judge you. No one will think less of you. His voice dropped even lower. But if you stay, know this. It will get worse before it gets better. My son will test you in ways you cannot imagine. He will try to break you. And if you break... His eyes flicked to Lazarus, then back to me. There are those in this court who will make certain you suffer for your failure. I understood the unspoken warning. Lazarus wanted me gone. Whether out of concern for the prince or his own political machinations, the beta saw me as a threat to be eliminated. I met the Alpha King's gaze and saw the exhaustion beneath his cold exterior, the father who had run out of options and was placing a desperate gamble on the least likely candidate. I don't break easily, Your Majesty, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. And I don't quit. Something that might have been respect flickered across his face. Then return to your duties, tend your wound, and prepare yourself. He moved back toward his desk, dismissing me with a gesture. Tomorrow will be worse. As I turned to leave, Lazarus's voice followed me, smooth and poisonous. Enjoy your coins, Omega. You won't live long enough to spend them. I didn't respond. I simply clutched the pouch to my chest, felt the weight of the king's test settling onto my shoulders like a yoke, and walked back toward the tower where a traumatized child waited to destroy me. The corridor seemed longer on the return journey, darker, and with each step, I felt the certainty of my decision solidifying into something harder than determination. I would survive this, not because I was strong or noble or special, but because I had nowhere else to go. And sometimes, having no choice is the greatest strength of all. The discovery came by accident on the third morning, when I found Jackson curled beneath his bed, trembling from a nightmare that had chased him into wakefulness. He didn't acknowledge me when I knelt on the cold floor, didn't flinch when I slowly extended my hand toward his shaking form. I didn't touch him, I knew better. But I stayed close, breathing slowly, deliberately, letting my presence settle into the space between us like morning mist. My grandmother used to say that omegas carried medicine in their very bones, that our scent could soothe the wild things if we learned to channel it properly. I had always dismissed it as the romantic notion of an old woman who wanted me to feel special. But as I knelt there, focusing on the rhythm of my breathing, something shifted. The air around us grew heavier, warmer, carrying the faint scent of herbs I couldn't name and hadn't touched. Jackson's trembling slowed. His breathing evened. And after several long minutes, he crawled out from beneath the bed and returned to sleep without once meeting my eyes. I didn't understand what had happened, but I knew enough not to question it. Over the following days, I tested this strange gift carefully. When Jackson grew agitated during lessons, I would move closer, letting my presence wash over him like a gentle tide. When his anger spiked at mealtimes, I would breathe deeply, consciously, willing that inexplicable calm to flow from my skin. It didn't always work. His rage was too deep, too practiced. But sometimes in brief moments I saw his shoulders drop, his fists unclench, his pale eyes lose their sharp edge. He never thanked me, never acknowledged the shift. But on the fifth night I found something on the narrow cot in my adjoining room. A wooden horse, its legs snapped clean off, placed carefully on my pillow. I recognized it from the hall of broken toys. Jackson must have retrieved it, must have chosen this specific casualty of his own fury to leave for me. It wasn't an apology. He was too proud, too wounded for that. But it was something. A broken offering. A nonverbal truce. I placed the horse on the windowsill where he could see it. A silent acceptance of whatever fragile peace we were building. The trouble began when I used my gift beyond the tower. A kitchen girl named Marie had scalded her hand badly, and the pack healer was occupied with more important patients. I found her sobbing in the servants' corridor, cradling her blistered palm. Without thinking, I took her hand in mine, focused on that same gentle breathing, and felt the warmth flow from my skin to hers. The girl's sobbing quieted. The angry redness of the burn seemed to fade slightly, enough that she looked at me with wide, startled eyes. What are you? Just an old Omega trick, I said quickly, releasing her hand. Keep it clean and wrapped. It'll heal faster than you think. But Marie talked. Servants always talked. And by evening, the whispers had reached ears I would have preferred stay ignorant. Lazarus found me 2 days later in the tower stairwell. His sudden presence blocking my path like a shadow given form. His smile was all teeth and no warmth. The Omega healer, he said softly. His eyes traveling over me with calculated assessment. Interesting how you appear from nowhere with abilities no one mentioned. Abilities that seem almost unnatural. My heart hammered against my ribs, but I kept my voice steady. I helped a girl with a burn, Beta Lazarus. Hardly dark magic. No. He stepped closer, forcing me back against the cold stone wall. Then explain how the prince, who has terrorized every woman in this keep, grows calmer in your presence. Explain how his nightmares have decreased. Explain how you, a poor Omega with no training, no education, no breeding, somehow succeed where noble-born caregivers failed. His voice dropped to a whisper. What did you do to that child? I did nothing but stay, I said, meeting his gaze despite every instinct screaming to submit. Perhaps that's all he needed. Lazarus studied me for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he smiled again, and it was worse than his anger. Be careful, Omega. Witchcraft is punishable by exile. Or worse. He brushed past me, his shoulder deliberately striking mine. And accidents happen so easily in keeps this old. I stood in the stairwell long after he'd gone, my hands shaking, understanding with cold certainty that I had made a dangerous enemy. Not because of what I could do, but because it worked. Because a poor Omega had succeeded where the Beta's political maneuvering required failure. The broken horse seemed to watch me from the windowsill when I returned, its snapped leg a reminder that some wounds couldn't be healed, only survived. The screaming started just past midnight, a sound so raw and primal it yanked me from shallow sleep into immediate terror. I was out of my cot and through the connecting door before conscious thought caught up with instinct, my bare feet slapping against cold stone as I ran toward Jackson's bed. He was sitting upright, eyes wide and unseeing. His small body rigid with a fear so absolute it seemed to vibrate in the air around him. His mouth was open, releasing scream after scream, each one tearing from his throat like something being ripped out by the roots. Sweat plastered his white blonde hair to his forehead, and his hands clawed at the blankets as if trying to climb out of his own skin. Jackson, I said, keeping my voice low and steady despite my racing heart. Your Highness, you're safe. We're here. He didn't hear me. His eyes stared through me at something only he could see, some horror playing out behind his gaze that I couldn't touch, couldn't reach. I had seen him angry, had weathered his calculated cruelty, but this was different. This was a child drowning in grief so profound it had manifested as waking nightmare. The door to his chambers burst open with enough force to crack against the wall. Alpha King Maddox stood in the doorway, his silver hair wild, his chest bare beneath a hastily thrown-on robe. For one unguarded moment, I saw past the cold authority to the father beneath, and what I saw there was fear. Not the careful, controlled concern of a king for his heir, but the raw, desperate terror of a parent watching his child suffer and being powerless to stop it. "How long?" he demanded, crossing the room in 3 long strides. "Just started, Your Majesty." "He won't respond, he can't hear." Maddox reached for his son, but the moment his hands touched Jackson's shoulders, the boy's screaming intensified. He thrashed, wild and unseeing, his small fists connecting with his father's chest, his face a mask of animal panic. The king held on, trying to contain the violence, but I could see the helplessness in his eyes, the knowledge that his strength meant nothing against this particular enemy. "Jackson, please." Maddox's voice cracked, and the sound of it, this powerful alpha reduced to begging, sent a spike of pain through my chest. "Son, come back. Come back to me." But Jackson was beyond words, beyond reach, lost in whatever dark place grief had carved inside his mind. I had seen these episodes before, smaller ones, brief moments of panic I could soothe with patience and proximity. But this was different. This was the full weight of his trauma breaking through every defense he'd built, and it was destroying him from the inside out. I didn't think. I simply moved. I climbed onto the bed beside them, close enough that my omega scent would reach the boy, and placed both hands on his small, trembling shoulders. Then I did what my grandmother had taught me long ago, what I had been too afraid to try fully until this moment. I closed my eyes, breathed deeply, and let every wall I'd built around my gift come crashing down. The change was immediate and overwhelming. That warm, herbal scent exploded from my skin like a physical force, flooding the room with a presence that felt ancient and powerful and utterly beyond my control. It smelled like summer meadows and healing herbs, like the earth after rain and the calm before dawn. I felt it pour from me in waves, felt it wrap around Jackson like invisible arms, felt it sink into his skin and bones and blood. The screaming stopped. Jackson's rigid body went slack, his breathing evening out as the terror drained from his face like water from a broken vessel. His eyes, which had been wide and wild, slowly focused, seeing me for the first time. Not with hatred, not with calculation, but with the simple, desperate need of a child seeking safety. "It's all right," I whispered, keeping my hands steady on his shoulders, maintaining the flow of whatever power was moving through me. "You're safe. The nightmare can't hurt you. I won't let it." His small hand reached up, gripped my sleeve with surprising strength. "Don't go," he whispered, his voice hoarse from screaming. "Please don't go." "I won't. I'm right here." Slowly, carefully, I eased him back down onto the pillows, never breaking contact, never letting the calming presence falter. His eyes grew heavy, his breathing deepened, and within minutes he had slipped into true sleep, not the fitful nightmare-plagued rest I'd witnessed before, but something genuine and healing. I stayed where I was, maintaining the connection, feeling the power drain from me like blood from an open wound. Exhaustion crashed over me in waves, but I didn't dare move. Not yet. Not until I was certain he was truly safe. "What did you do?" I had almost forgotten the king was there. When I looked up, Maddox was staring at me with an expression I couldn't read. Shock, perhaps, or fear, or something that looked dangerously close to hope. "I helped him," I said simply, too tired for elaborate explanations. "That's all." "That's not all." His voice was rough, strained. "That scent, that power, that's not normal Omega presence. That's something else entirely." Before I could respond, more footsteps echoed in the corridor. Beta Lazarus appeared in the doorway, flanked by 2 guards. His expression carefully arranged into concern that didn't reach his eyes. "Your Majesty," I heard the commotion. "Is the prince?" He stopped, his gaze landing on me sitting beside the sleeping child, my hand still resting on Jackson's shoulders. Something flickered across his face. Triumph, perhaps, or vindication. What is she doing to him? Helping him, Maddox said coldly. As you can see, my son is sleeping peacefully for the first time in weeks. Or she's controlling him. Lazarus stepped into the room. His voice pitched to carry authority. Your Majesty, I have tried to warn you about this Omega. Her abilities are unnatural. What we just witnessed, that scent, that power, it's mind control. Witchcraft. She's manipulating the prince, and by extension, manipulating you. The guards shifted uncomfortably, their hands moving toward their weapons. I felt my heart sink, felt the trap closing around me with perfect precision. This was what Lazarus had been waiting for. A public moment, witnesses, undeniable evidence of my unnatural abilities. Is that what you think you witnessed? Maddox's voice was dangerously quiet as he stood. His full height and authority suddenly filling the room like a physical presence. Mind control. What else could it be? No Omega has that kind of power naturally. She must have learned it somewhere, been taught by someone. Your Majesty, for the safety of your son, for the safety of this pack, she must be removed and questioned. No. The single word cut through Lazarus's speech like a blade through silk. The beta fell silent, his mouth still half open, shock registering on his carefully controlled features. Maddox turned to face him fully, and I saw the Alpha King in his complete, terrible glory. The ruler who had held this pack together through war and tragedy, who had buried his mate and raised his son alone, who had survived every challenge to his authority with ruthless efficiency. My son was screaming, Maddox said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute command. He was lost in a nightmare so profound I couldn't reach him. I, his father, his alpha, his king, could not help him. He gestured toward me, toward Jackson sleeping peacefully beneath my hands. She did in moments what I have failed to do in 3 years. She brought him peace. She brought him safety. She brought him back. But the method is irrelevant. Maddox's eyes blazed with cold fury. The result is what matters. My son is sleeping. He is calm. He is, for the first time since his mother died, truly at rest. And you dare stand in this room and suggest I remove the only person who has managed to give him that. Lazarus's face had gone pale. Your Majesty, I only meant to suggest caution. Your suggestion is noted and rejected. Maddox moved closer to the beta, using his superior height and presence to force the other man back a step. Omega Nerissa's presence is necessary, essential. And anyone who attempts to interfere with her duties, who questions her methods, who spreads rumors about witchcraft or mind control, will answer directly to me. Is that understood? The room fell into thick silence. The guards stared at the floor. Lazarus's jaw worked, fury and humiliation warring across his features. Is that understood, Beta Lazarus? Yes, Your Majesty. The words came out clipped, barely controlled. Perfectly understood. Good. Then I suggest you return to your quarters and reflect on the difference between concern and interference. Maddox dismissed him with a gesture, and Lazarus had no choice but to retreat, his shoulders rigid with suppressed rage. When they were gone, the king turned back to me. I expected anger, perhaps, or suspicion despite his public defense. Instead, I saw only exhaustion that matched my own. Can you maintain that? He asked quietly, gesturing toward his sleeping son. Can you keep him calm through the night? Yes, Your Majesty. He nodded slowly, then did something that shocked me more than anything else that had happened. He pulled a chair close to the bed and sat down, settling in as if he intended to stay. Then I'll keep watch, he said simply, in case the nightmare returns. So we sat together through the long hours before dawn, the Alpha King, the poor Omega, and the sleeping child between us, holding vigil over the fragile peace we'd managed to create. And somewhere in those quiet hours, I understood that everything had changed. Lazarus had meant to expose me, to destroy me. Instead, he had forced the king to make a choice. And Maddox had chosen me. The message arrived 3 days later, delivered by a kitchen boy who wouldn't meet my eyes. A single line scrawled in elegant script. The Eastern Garden. Sunset. Come alone. No signature, but I recognized the handwriting from official documents I'd seen in the king's study. Lazarus. Every instinct screamed at me to ignore it, to show the note to Maddox, to seek protection behind the king's declaration. But the second line, written smaller beneath the first, froze the words in my throat. Your guardian's fever has returned. Such a shame when healers become too expensive for poor omegas to afford. My hands shook as I read it again, understanding the threat beneath the polite words. He knew about my guardian, knew about her illness, knew exactly where to press to make me vulnerable. I burned the note in the hearth and went to the Eastern Garden as the sun began its descent. The garden was overgrown, clearly abandoned years ago when Queen Helen had died. Roses had gone wild, their thorns claiming territory once carefully maintained. Stone benches were cracked and moss-covered, and the fountain at the center stood dry, its basin filled with dead leaves. It was a fitting place for what was about to happen, beautiful once, now left to rot. Lazarus was waiting beside the fountain, his posture relaxed, his expression pleasant. Anyone passing by would think we were simply having a cordial conversation. That carefully constructed facade made him more dangerous than any display of aggression could. "Omega Nerissa," he said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Thank you for coming. I was afraid you might be foolish enough to ignore my invitation. What do you want, Beta Lazarus?" "Direct. I appreciate that." He circled the fountain slowly, his movements deliberately casual. "I want you to leave. Today. Pack whatever pitiful belongings you possess and disappear from Frost Fong Keep as if you were never here. The king declared my presence necessary. I serve at his pleasure, not yours." "The king," Lazarus said, his voice hardening, "is blinded by desperation. He sees you as a solution because you provide temporary relief to his damaged son. But what happens when that relief becomes dependency? When the prince cannot function without your unnatural influence? When the king himself grows addicted to the peace you provide?" He stopped, fixing me with a stare that carried genuine conviction. "You're not healing that boy, Omega. You're crippling him, making him weak, making them both weak. That's not true, isn't it?" He moved closer, close enough that I had to resist the urge to step back. "The prince survived 3 years without your magic. He was hard, yes, angry, but he was strong. He was learning to live with his grief, to harden himself against it. Now he's soft again, vulnerable. You've reopened wounds that had begun to scar." His voice dropped to a whisper. "You're not helping him, Nerissa. You're destroying him slowly, kindly, with every moment of false comfort you provide." The words hit harder than I expected because there was a kernel of terrible logic in them. Was I helping Jackson or simply making him dependent? Was my calming presence allowing him to heal or preventing him from learning to cope alone? Lazarus saw the doubt flicker across my face and smiled. "You understand. But that makes this easier." He reached into his coat and withdrew a sealed letter. "Your guardian's healer has agreed to provide extended treatment at no cost, a generous gift from an anonymous benefactor. All you have to do is leave. Today, quietly. The king will survive your absence. The prince will learn to endure. And your guardian will live." I stared at the letter, at the promise of everything I'd been fighting for since I'd arrived at this cursed keep. My guardian safe and healthy. No more desperate scrambling for coins. No more blood on my sleeves or threats in dark corridors. All I had to do was abandon a traumatized child and the king who had defended me. And if I refuse? The pleasant mask slipped, revealing the cold calculation beneath. Then accidents happen. Healers forget to visit. Medicine becomes unavailable. Old women with fevers die alone. And poor omegas discover that loyalty to kings means nothing when those kings cannot protect everyone. He held out the letter. "Choose quickly, Nerissa. The sun is setting, and my patience has limits." I reached for the letter, my fingers trembling. Not with fear, but with rage so profound it turned my vision white at the edges. This man had threatened everything I loved, had manipulated my desperation, had stood in this dead garden and offered me blood money to abandon a child who had finally begun to trust. "You're right about one thing," I said quietly, my voice shaking. "I am poor. I am desperate. I am powerless." I took the letter from his hand, felt the weight of it, the terrible temptation it represented. But I'm not a coward. And I'm not a monster. I tore the letter in half. Then in half again. And again, until it was nothing but scraps that scattered in the evening breeze like snow. Lazarus's face transformed, pleasant mask shattering completely. "You stupid, ignorant Nerissa." Jackson's voice cut through the garden, high and frightened. I turned to see him running toward us, his face flushed with panic, his small body moving with purpose. Behind him, several paces back, I could see Clara the nursemaid trying to catch up. "Jackson, go back." But the boy had seen Lazarus standing too close to me, had seen the torn letter, had read the threat in the beta's posture with the intuition of a child who had spent years learning to recognize danger. "Get away from her." Jackson's voice cracked with fury, with something that sounded heartbreakingly like fear. Not for himself. For me. Lazarus turned toward the boy, his expression shifting to something uglier. "Prince Jackson, return to your chambers. This doesn't concern." Jackson launched himself at the beta with a scream that belonged to something wild and wounded. It wasn't the calculated cruelty I'd witnessed before, the deliberate attacks meant to drive women away. This was raw, protective rage. A child defending someone he'd finally allowed himself to care about. Lazarus caught the boy easily, his hand closing around Jackson's thin wrist, holding him suspended. "You little savage. Just like your mother, too emotional, too weak. She ran away, you know. Couldn't stand you, couldn't stand your father. Left you both because you weren't worth." I moved without thinking, without planning, driven by an instinct older than thought. I threw myself between them, wrenching Jackson from Lazarus's grip and pulling the child against my chest, my arms wrapping around him like a shield. My body positioned to take whatever blow would come, my omega scent flooding out in waves of protection and defiance. "Don't you dare touch him," I heard myself say, my voice carrying a strength I didn't know I possessed. "Don't you dare speak about his mother. Don't you dare." Jackson had gone completely still in my arms. I could feel his small body trembling, could feel his rapid heartbeat against my chest, could feel the exact moment when something fundamental shifted inside him. He pulled back just enough to look up at me, his pale eyes wide and searching, seeing something in my face that I didn't understand. My expression must have held something he recognized. Not calculation, not duty, not the careful mask of a caregiver performing a role. Just the raw, instinctive need to protect him, to shield him, to place my body between him and harm without hesitation or thought. The way a mother would. His small hand reached up, touched my cheek with a gentleness I'd never seen from him. His eyes filled with tears, not the angry, frustrated tears of his tantrums, but something deeper, something that came from a place inside him that had been locked shut for 3 years. "Mom!" The word came out as barely a whisper, confused and desperate and heartbreakingly hopeful. "Mom!" Time stopped. The world narrowed to this single impossible moment, a traumatized child looking at a poor Omega and seeing the ghost of the woman he'd lost, the love he'd been denied, the safety he'd spent 3 years violently rejecting because accepting it would mean admitting she was truly gone. "Oh, sweetheart," I heard myself say, tears streaming down my own face, pulling him closer. "I'm here. I'm right here." He collapsed against me, his small body shaking with sobs that tore from his chest like something physical being expelled. 3 years of grief, of rage, of desperate loneliness came pouring out in broken, gasping cries while I held him and rocked him and whispered nonsense words of comfort that meant everything and nothing. I barely registered Lazarus's sharp intake of breath, barely noticed Clara's arrival at the garden entrance. All I could focus on was this child in my arms, this broken boy who had finally finally allowed himself to break completely in the presence of someone who wouldn't run. "What is happening here?" Maddox's voice cut through the garden like winter wind. I looked up to see the Alpha King standing at the entrance, his expression thunderous, his eyes taking in the scene with rapid assessment. Lazarus standing too close, the torn letter scattered across dead leaves, his son sobbing in my arms. "Your Majesty," Lazarus began, his voice smooth despite the situation. "The Omega was protecting my son." Maddox moved into the garden with that predatory grace, his attention fixed on the beta. "I heard what you said about Queen Helen. I heard you call my son a savage." His voice dropped to something deadly quiet. "I heard you threaten Omega Nerissa's guardian." Lazarus's face went pale. "Your Majesty, I can explain." "No." Maddox stopped directly in front of the beta, using his full alpha presence to force the other man to his knees. "You conspired against a member of my household. You threatened the life of an innocent woman to manipulate her ward. You dared to speak poison about my late mate to her son. And worst of all," he glanced at me, at Jackson still clutching my cloak, "you attempted to remove the only person who has given my child peace in 3 years. Your Majesty, please. You are hereby stripped of your rank as beta. You are exiled from Frostfang Pack, effective immediately. You have until dawn to be beyond our borders. If you are seen on Pack lands after sunrise, you will be executed as a traitor." The pronouncement fell like a guillotine blade. Final. Absolute. Lazarus opened his mouth, perhaps to protest, perhaps to plead, but the expression on Maddox's face silenced him more effectively than words. 2 guards appeared. Clara must have summoned them, and hauled the former beta to his feet. As they dragged him away, Lazarus's eyes met mine one last time, filled with such concentrated hatred that I felt it like a physical touch. Then he was gone, and the garden fell into heavy silence. Maddox approached slowly, carefully, as if we were wild creatures that might spook. He knelt beside us, his eyes on his son's tear-stained face. "Jackson," he said softly, his voice gentler than I'd ever heard it. "Son, are you all right?" Jackson lifted his head from my shoulder, looked at his father, then back at me. His small hand gripped my cloak tighter. "She stayed," he whispered, his voice hoarse from crying. "He tried to make her leave, and she stayed. She protected me. Like..." He couldn't finish the sentence, but he didn't need to. Maddox's eyes met mine over his son's head, and in them I saw something that made my breath catch. Gratitude, yes, but also recognition. Understanding. And beneath it all, something warmer, something dangerous, something that looked like the first crack in a wall he'd built around his heart 3 years ago. "Thank you," he said simply, and somehow those 2 words carried more weight than any declaration. I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat, and held his son. "Our son," some treacherous part of my heart whispered, while the last light faded from the dead garden and something new began to bloom in its place. 3 months had passed since the word "Mom" had shattered the frozen halls of Frostfang Keep, and the transformation was undeniable. Nerissa knelt in the healing chamber, her hands glowing with the soft amber light that had become as natural to her as breathing. The low-ranking wolf before her, a young scout who'd twisted his ankle during patrol, watched in awe as the swelling receded beneath her touch. She smiled gently, withdrawing her hands and reaching for a poultice of wintermint and bone moss. "Rest it for 2 days," she instructed, her voice carrying the quiet authority she'd never imagined possessing. "And tell your patrol leader to check the ice bridge at the northern border. If you slip there, others will too." The scout bowed deeply, not with the perfunctory deference shown to servants, but with genuine respect. "Yes, Lady Nerissa." Lady. The title still felt strange on her shoulders, like a cloak she hadn't quite grown into. Yet the pack had bestowed it without prompting, without ceremony. It had simply become truth, the way water becomes ice in winter. She dismissed the scout and moved to the window, gazing out at the courtyard where Jackson practiced his footwork with the junior warriors. The pup, no, the young wolf, she corrected herself, moved with growing confidence, his silver hair catching the afternoon light. He laughed at something one of the other children said, and the sound pierced her heart with joy. No more night terrors. No more violent outbursts. No more hatred burning in those pale eyes. You're watching him again. Nerissa didn't startle at Maddox's voice. She'd grown accustomed to his silent approaches, the way he seemed to materialize from shadows whenever she was alone. She'd also learned to recognize the particular timbre his voice took when they were private, stripped of the formal edge he wielded like armor in court. "He's improved so much," she said, not turning from the window. "Yesterday, he apologized to one of the servants for tracking mud inside." Apologized, Maddox. Without prompting. The Alpha King moved beside her, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his massive frame. Even now, his presence commanded the space around him, but where once it had terrified her, now it felt like shelter. "You did that," Maddox said quietly. "You brought my son back from the darkness." "We did that," Nerissa corrected, finally meeting his gaze. "You let me try. You protected me when others would have cast me out." Something flickered in Maddox's silver eyes, an emotion too complex to name. His hand rose slowly, as though moving through water, and brushed a strand of hair from her face. The touch lingered, his calloused fingers tracing the line of her jaw with devastating gentleness. Nerissa. Her name on his lips was a prayer and a surrender. "I have stood alone for 3 years, convinced that what died with Helen could never be resurrected. I was wrong." Her breath caught. They had danced around this truth for weeks, circling it like wary wolves, neither daring to speak it aloud. "The mate bond," Maddox continued, his voice rough, "is not something I sought. I thought myself incapable of it after Helen. But the bond does not ask permission. It simply is." His hand cupped her face fully now, thumb stroking her cheekbone. "You are mine, Nerissa. Not because I own you, but because my soul has claimed yours. Because without you, both my son and I would be lost to grief." Tears pricked Nerissa's eyes. "I'm just an Omega. I came here desperate and terrified, worth less than. You are worth everything." The words were fierce, absolute. "You are the healer who saved my heir. The woman who brought light back to these halls. The only creature in this realm brave enough to face a traumatized pup and an emotionally crippled king." A smile ghosted across his stern features. "You are my mate, Nerissa. If you will have me." The question hung between them, fragile and precious. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes." Maddox lowered his forehead to hers, a gesture of profound intimacy among their kind. The mate bond snapped fully into place, a golden thread that had been forming since that first night she'd calmed Jackson, now blazing into permanence. She gasped at the intensity of it, feeling his emotions flood through the connection. Devotion, protectiveness, and a love so fierce it stole her breath. "Mom! Father!" They broke apart as Jackson bounded into the chamber. His training clothes dusty but his face alight with excitement. "I disarmed Marcus 3 times. He said I'm getting faster." He stopped, looking between them with the uncanny perception of children. "Did something happen?" Nerissa and Maddox exchanged glances. Then Maddox, the fearsome Alpha King of the Frostfang pack, smiled, truly smiled, and held out his hand to his son. "Something good, Jackson. Something very good." The pup grinned and crashed into both of them, wrapping his small arms around Nerissa's waist and reaching up to clasp his father's hand. The 3 of them stood together in the healing chamber's golden light, and Nerissa felt the final piece of her transformation click into place. She was no longer the poor Omega, desperate and invisible. She was pack. She was family. She was home. And as Maddox's arm encircled her shoulders and Jackson's laughter echoed through the halls that had once known only silence, Nerissa understood that worth was never about status or station. It was about love given freely, magic shared generously, and the courage to stay when everything inside screamed to run. Outside, the first snow of winter began to fall on Frostfang Keep, soft and gentle, covering the harsh edges of the world in something beautiful. Thank you for joining the pack today. If this story pulled you in, make sure to subscribe and tap the moon bell so you never miss the next Alpha Destiny. And tell me in the comments, who should we follow next under the full moon?